All right. It looks like we are officially live. Hey, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us here today for our June FinCrime Friday Chat. Today we've got an awesome conversation. We're going to be talking about fentanyl and financial crime and how financial crime and compliance professionals can use the tools and strategies and tactics you guys work with every single day to identify and help disrupt financial crime related to fentanyl trafficking. We've got Brian Svoboda-Kindle here with us today, our VP of Products and Programming, and Cheyenne Visca, our Senior Training Manager. I am your host, Clayton Norman. I'm the Social Media Marketing Manager for Serify, which is the parent company for ACFCS, and it's great to be back. So if you're tuning in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing that. Love seeing all of the people from all across the globe tuning in for these conversations. Just drop that in the comments. Also, if you have questions, comments, anything that you'd like to share, we encourage you to become a part of this conversation with us, right? That's what the comments are for. We'll display your questions and try to answer those. So just participate with us and let's have some fun. But again, first off, let's start with that roll call. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And of course, don't forget that if you are not an ACFCS member, today is a great day to head over to acfcs.org and to fix that. By becoming a member, you get access to hundreds of hours of training. I don't know, maybe thousands. I'm not exactly sure. Brian, what do you think? How many? Hundreds? Is hundreds right?
Yeah, I think we're still in the high hundreds at this point. I don't know if we've quite cracked 1,000 yet, but by the end of the year, I'm pretty confident we'll be there. So, yeah.
Excellent. So hundreds of hours of training, exclusive events, incredible networking opportunities, tools and strategies, and things that you can take and put into action as soon as you walk out of one of our events that will help you grow and excel in your FinCrime and compliance career. And man, people are already showing up big time. We've got Jennifer from Edmonton, Alberta. I see Alexis from Utah, Raya, sorry if I got that wrong, from Toronto, Josette from Annapolis Valley in Canada, Jackie Lee from Gibraltar. I see Texas in there. Love that. Texas boy myself, so glad to see you guys. Panama, welcome, Lorena. It's great to see you, guys. Keep those coming, and we will keep showing those. Oh, Buenos Aires, I love it. All right, so as I mentioned today, we are talking about fentanyl trafficking and financial crimes related to the trafficking of fentanyl. But as usual, before we jump into that, we're going to start with some FinCrime news headlines. And actually, this very first one does relate to fentanyl trafficking. This one says, so the headline here is U.S. targets 3 Mexican financial institutions under fentanyl sanctions. On June 25th, 2025, the U.S. Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, you guys are probably familiar with that, imposed sanctions on 3 Mexican financial institutions, CI Banco, Intercom Banco, and Vector Casa de Bolsa, designating them as primary money laundering concerns under new fentanyl-related authorities or under new fentanyl-related regulations. The sanctions prohibit U.S. financial institutions from engaging in certain transactions with these entities, citing their alleged involvement in laundering funds for Mexican drug cartels and facilitating payments for fentanyl precursor chemicals. Mexico's finance ministry has requested evidence to support these allegations, but has not received any so far. And the sanctioned institutions have, of course, denied the accusations. Brian, this is one you picked. What's our analysis on this headline?
Yeah, I mean, definitely it shows a couple of things. One is the administration's really intensive focus on fentanyl trafficking and a willingness to use a wide variety of tools. These types of designations are not totally new in terms of like the universe of the U.S. financial crime enforcement, But this is the first time they've been done under the Fend Off Fentanyl Act and the Fentanyl Sanctions Act. These were two laws passed, I think, in 2023, and they give new powers to U.S. Treasury, acting through FinCEN, to use these primary money laundering concern designations, specifically in regards to institutions related to that are alleged to be involved in fentanyl trafficking. So that's kind of the novel twist to this. CI Banco, Intercom Banco, these are commercial banks. They're not huge institutions. Vector Casa de Bolsa is the other one. That one's actually one of the top 10 securities dealers in the securities brokers in Mexico. So, it's a decent size institution, but these aren't the large global banks, right? So it seems, there's a financial crime impact to this and a political impact to this, right? It seems like part of it is a targeted effort by the U.S. administration to kind of send a message that they are, firing a warning shot, so to speak, at Mexico in an effort to probably increase some enforcement and some scrutiny within Mexico. Now, the Mexican government, in turn, has kind of come back and said, hey, we need more evidence of this. And the Mexican regulators have actually taken over the institutions in question to ensure that they don't collapse as a result of these designations. There is definitely an issue with enforcement in Mexico. Mexico has laws, regulations, et cetera, on the books. There's some good intelligence sharing taking place with the United States. Definitely not picking on any jurisdiction. If you have attended our events, you probably know that we like to pick on the U.S. more than any other one, because the U.S. is, I would argue, the number one money laundering country in the world by a wide margin. And there's lots of reasons for that. But regardless, Mexican enforcement has for years, been kind of less than a lot of folks would like to see. So I would say that if anything, this is a sort of calculated move by the U.S. Treasury to try to drive up enforcement in Mexico, and certainly not necessarily a bad thing at all.
All right. All right. Heading on to our second headline then. Amnesty International accuses Cambodia of enabling a brutal scam industry. Amnesty International reports that Cambodia is turning a blind eye to human rights abuses linked to cybercrime operations, where victims, including children, are trafficked and forced into global fraud schemes. The scam industry is estimated to generate over $12.5 billion annually, operating from repurposed casinos and hotels. And that is from Reuters. Cheyenne, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've been around ACFCS for a while, you've probably heard us talk about pig butchering, and this is one of those components. So for those of you who may not know or may not be as familiar, pig butchering is a scam that's been really hitting the market for the last couple of years pretty hard, and it's expanded into this this human trafficking concern as well. So it's like a romance scam meets an investment scam. And it's very organized in the sense that they have now these compounds where they recruit people with false job ads, those sorts of things. And then they force them to perpetrate these scams, these schemes. And in doing so, at threat to their life, at threat to violence, they're pretty effective in the way that they engage people and defraud them. If you've seen Erin West talk with us at all, she's huge on Operation Shamrock and kind of trying to disrupt these scam centers. But I believe we're seeing quite a few of these crop up primarily in is it Southwest Asia? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's becoming more and more of an issue, and a lot of the governments seem to be potentially receiving kickbacks from these centers to perpetuate the activity. So definitely keep an eye on that. Check out your local regulators. FinCEN also has some information on pig butchering and the red flags there.
Yeah, actually, this week it was really crazy when I started looking for our headlines for this conversation. We're only going to cover two of them, but the first three that actually popped up were all related to Cambodia. And so actually our next headline here is that Thai teen escapes Cambodian scam compound by jumping from window. An 18-year-old Thai teenager recounted escaping a Cambodian scam compound by leaping from an 8th floor window. Just like you mentioned, he was lured by a fake job offer and subjected to torture and forced scams, highlighting the dangers of human trafficking in the region. So what's really fascinating or really interesting and in a dark way to me about this is it highlights, I think, something that we've hit on some of our other conversations about the industrialization of this particular type of scam industry especially in Southeast Asia. I mean, I think we've talked about some other places as well. But that it becomes then this nexus for multiple different types of financial crimes being perpetrated, not just the scams that are being executed on, victims from across the globe, but even the scammers themselves are to some degree victims, just like the kid that we just heard about. Brian, you want to weigh in on that one about the kid escaping?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it certainly highlights the human trafficking aspect of this, which is a tragic addition to the already horrible impact of this, as you mentioned, industrialized scamming, right? And to Cheyenne's point about the focus on this regional focus, Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand. Have been the kind of hotbeds of this activity for a while. And it's good to see the reports like, Transparency International, because I think part of what the perception shift has been over the past few years, this isn't going to be stopped by financial institutions like flagging suspicious transactions, cryptocurrency exchanges, and reporting them in SARS, right? This is only going to be stopped with like intensive political and social pressure campaigns, particularly on these governments. And there's been some steps in that direction. Last year, Treasury sanctioned a guy named Lee Yong Fat. He's one of Cambodia's richest men. He's a senator in Cambodia. He's an associate of Cambodia's prime minister. And he also ran a series of casinos and alleged scam compounds. So, this is very much, as Cheyenne mentioned, this is very much something that's been embedded into kind of the infrastructure of the country, and a lot of has strong ties to all the political powers that be at this point. And so combating it, yes, is a financial crime issue, but we should all look for opportunities to the best we can, like Operation Shamrock, others that are not only providing training on how we in the industry can do it, but also raising social awareness and pushing for wider solutions from the political side, from the enforcement side, et cetera. Because that's, in my mind, at this point where we're at, right? This problem is way beyond just a financial crime problem. This is something where we're really going to need concerted political effort in order to make a dent in these groups.
Okay. All right. One more headline, and then we'll move on to the meat of the conversation. So this one a little bit closer to home. Connecticut DFC, I guess that's the Department of Children and Families, faulted for failing children vulnerable to sex trafficking. A state audit revealed that the Connecticut Department of Children and Families failed to provide adequate services to teenage girls who were victims of sex trafficking or involved in the juvenile justice system. The audit noted a significant increase in runaway incidents with systemic shortcomings in care and oversight. Obviously, pretty disturbing story. Just this week on the State Your Case podcast, we also had ultimately ended up being a positive story, but pretty disturbing story of child trafficking for sexual purposes. What do we think about this particular headline?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good reminder of some of the realities of trafficking, right? There's a wide universe of human trafficking. And when we look at sex trafficking, I think, there is and I think this perception shift has really sunk in a lot over the past few years, but I think it's another reminder that while there is international sex trafficking, there's people brought from other jurisdictions, there's people who are forced against their will by physical coercion. Unfortunately, a lot of the sex trafficking and a lot of the people that study this place said the majority of the sex trafficking that does take place is, in most jurisdictions at least, varies by jurisdiction, domestic, right? It's people within your community that are vulnerable, like these individuals in the care of the state, who are then recruited and either through trickery, emotional manipulation, or physical force, brought into the sex trafficking space. Um, how does that translate to your institution? I think that helps you to kind of tailor your controls, right? And, make sure that you're looking at the right sort of regional risk, demographic risk, et cetera. Keep in mind that this is both a, corridor issue. There's people being moved from other countries. There's international folks who are trafficked, but it's absolutely still a domestic issue too. Shine, anything you want to add to that?
So this one hits super close to home. Like, just to share a little bit, I had family who went through the foster system, and to the point of hiring a lawyer, fought tooth and nail to try and get our kids, not mine personally, but our family kids, into our home, and it was just, it's a mess. And so when I read this story and we're talking about fentanyl, there is an element to this that is, organized crime that we can try and do our best to prevent through the system, but there's also an element here that is very socially driven, very human. I read the story and I was like, well, of course we have such an issue with, our these generations coming up and having such a hard time with addiction. Like, we've already failed them as children. Like, we're supposed to protect them, safeguard, shepherd these children into their lives, and here we are in their moment of need, letting them down. So, um, yeah, big thoughts on that. It's a huge social issue, and I think that hopefully we can turn it around. We'll just keep trying.
Yep.
Yeah. I think, it's a reminder that while there is a financial aspect to this, it's also a very human issue too, right? And these are human crimes at the end of the day.
Yeah. All right. We're going to wrap on headlines now and jump into our conversation about fentanyl and the overlap or connection between fentanyl trafficking and financial crimes. For folks who maybe have just tuned in, please let us know where you're watching from. And if you have questions, if you have comments, I've already seen some people share some links and some comments in the comments already. Go ahead and post your comments. We will try to answer questions, have a conversation around your thoughts around this. So here's the deal. So fentanyl trafficking is not only a devastating public health crisis, it's also a sophisticated financial crime problem. Traffickers move millions in illicit profits through legitimate financial channels, exploiting vulnerabilities in the global financial system to fund the production, distribution, and laundering that goes along with fentanyl trafficking. As the opioid epidemic deepens, the role of financial crime and compliance professionals has become more critical than ever. So today we're going to talk about how fentanyl trafficking networks operate, the financial red flags associated with their activity, and how the people watching today and participating in this conversation can detect and disrupt illicit flows linked to fentanyl trafficking while helping safeguard financial systems and even saving lives in the process. That's what the stakes are today. So with that, jump right into our questions here. So Brian, we'll kick it off with you. So let's just level set a little bit. What is fentanyl? I think most people are probably mostly familiar, but let's just get it out there. What is fentanyl, and why has it become such a dominant and dangerous substance in the global drug trade?
Yeah, definitely great place to start. I think people are familiar with fentanyl at this point, but maybe not, some of the kind of background of it. So I'll give the big picture. I know we have folks who are here from all over the world, and I know this has sometimes kind of felt like, and really is, a North American problem, primarily in terms of the end users. But we'll get into why I think it matters for the folks who are here from India, from Pakistan, from I see London, Lesotho. So, and a big part of that is that the supply chains, the transit networks that feed this issue are global. It is a global. When we talk about sourcing, procurement, distribution, it's really at this point become a global thing. It's not limited to just China, Mexico, US, like it might have been in the past. But to back up and talk about what fentanyl is, it's a synthetic opioid, um, one of a large class of synthetic opioids derived from chemicals, and it's really, really potent. 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. Very, very dangerous in terms of consuming too much and very easy to overdose on it. As a result, it's driven both a level of addiction that has gone beyond what has been seen from these other opioids and a level of deaths that goes way beyond what have been seen from these opioids. It's really easy to overdose on fentanyl, and it produces a really intense high, gets people stuck on it. So all in all, just a very dangerous and bad drug from a user perspective, but something that's also highly, highly addictive from a producer perspective. When we talk about the organized crime groups behind this, it is absolutely a highly, highly profitable drug. And the reason for that is it can be synthesized from precursor chemicals that are cheap, and they were until, yeah, it's getting a little harder, fortunately, and shout out to everybody out there who's making it harder on these guys. It's still relatively cheap and easy to buy precursor chemicals and make large amount of fentanyls. There's reporting from FinCEN, from FinTrack, really great resources on this that indicate that you can take $10,000 and turn it into millions of dollars by purchasing precursor chemicals, cooking the fentanyl, adulterating pills, etc., and then getting them out there to street level networks, and then moving the money back up the supply chain. Yeah, and as somebody says in the chat there, it's odorless, it's tasteless. It is very frequently passed off as other drugs. So this isn't something, there are sellers out there who are selling fentanyl, usually to people who have become more like, deeper into their addiction, but it is very frequently sold as other drugs. And that's part of why it leads to overdoses, and leads to people taking something they don't know what it is, looks like a little pill, right? That type of thing. So all in all, just a highly dangerous, highly addictive drug that is also, a highly profitable drug for the cartels, primarily at this point, cartels behind it, but not exclusively. So, yeah, that's a little intro to the topic in terms of why I think it matters for this audience. I'll just reiterate that, while the addiction and the usage are primarily, not exclusively, within US and Canada at this point, there's some research that suggests it's spreading in Europe, especially because since the Taliban have been cracking down on heroin, it's been harder and more expensive to get heroin into Europe. A lot of the trafficking routes also went through Ukraine, and have since had to reroute to other places since the war has been taking place over the past few years. So there is some opportunism, and some potential for it to spread in Europe as well. Um, Europe is a bit of a different market in terms of drugs and how people consume them. I think people are generally more careful in Europe for whatever reason about their drug consumption. So it hasn't really taken hold yet. But all of that is to say that, from a user perspective, it is spreading and likely to spread further. And from a production perspective, the chemicals, precursors, equipment that feed this epidemic of fentanyl come from a lot of different places. India is a producer country at this point, and not necessarily of things that are intentionally, going to be used for fentanyl production. There are legitimate uses for the precursors that feed the fentanyl epidemic. There are legitimate uses in medical arenas for all of the equipment that feeds the fentanyl epidemic. But that said, these transactions are still these purchases of this equipment could still be used for trafficking, and some of the transactional trails that might be coming from your jurisdiction, the trade transactions, the money flowing to these businesses can still be flagged, reported, and ultimately investigated. So I'll pause there before I get too far ahead of myself, because I know we're going to get deeper into all these, but that's a little scene setting about what fentanyl is and why I think it matters for a global audience.
Yeah, and I think that's all super helpful context. We've already got some great questions that I think we'll also do. But before we do that, Cheyenne, can you talk a little bit about, a little bit more about how the fentanyl trafficking operations work, and then where that source of intersection with the financial institutions or the financial industries could be our entry point for the people on this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're looking at supply chain general, okay, we're going to super high level. So you've got your suppliers, typically chemical companies, right? And then you have and they're selling precursor chemicals. So these are the chemicals that you cook down to make the drug. You are going to have chemical brokers who connect the distributor or the manufacturer with the person looking to buy. You're going to have, and then you're going to need to ship the product, right? So I feel like this is where we can start really getting involved in disrupting in the supply chain is shipment. When we're looking at onboarding businesses, freight companies, what do you call the big boats? Are those also freight companies?
Shipping
companies, yeah.
maritime.
Shipping, maritime. There we go. Yeah, there we are. Boat freights. You're going to start to see more and more in that business. So there are some red flags associated with that. A lot of times, does it make sense? Are they dealing with a dual use good, something that can be used for both an applicable medical reason or also illicitly in a way that we wouldn't want to promote as a business. And then from there, once it's moved into these countries, it's typically produced in these clandestine labs. These are often mobile and also under cartel protection. So we're looking at pretty organized crime here to manufacture. And once it's produced, it's smuggled into the countries where they sell it, and they'll distribute it to street level dealers. So there's a number of places within this towards the end of this chain where we can really start getting involved. A lot of it comes down to, just from a financial crimes perspective, from knowing our customers. We had a question in the chat about specific alerts for catching this. And what I would say is it's going to depend on your institution, what customers you have in your institution, what their nexus is. And then just there's some other things that we can add to it to help with known red flags to help flag this as we go. But it is, it's also a social issue. So just make sure that, how do I say this? Not everybody who struggles with addiction is a bad person and doesn't deserve to be banked. So just make sure that when you're reviewing these alerting activities, we're focusing on those that do the most harm to our institutions, to our communities, to the globe. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think those are great points. There are a lot of, unfortunately, people struggling with addiction out there, and they can be actually a window into some of these trafficking networks, but they're obviously not the risk, right? The risk is the dealers and the distribution networks. And I think, Sean, you did a great job kind of breaking down how you might see this activity show up at your institution, right? There's procurement, and that's where cartels are trying to get the precursor chemicals. So depending on what type of institution you are, that might be your main risk area and your main source of red flags, right? If you're a large global bank, you have a lot of international trade, or you're in a trade finance branch, you're really going to be worried about the procurement aspect of the financing. So looking at wire transfers with certain chemical abstract services numbers. This is like a global body that identifies chemicals and has certain numbers associated with them for control purposes, or looking for even just names of chemicals. There's certain names of precursor chemicals that are associated with fentanyl production, like 4AP. And there's some ones that were previously listed as controlled, like 4ANPP. So they've switched now to, or at least in the last couple of years, they've switched to 4AP or 1BOC 4ANPP, right? So these are out there. There's some really good government documents that put these out there. So if you're in the space where you're involved in trade, or you're doing cross-border transactions, a lot of your concern is going to be about procurement, financing, and distribution, obtaining precursors, obtaining equipment. So you're also going to be looking for transactions related to things like dye presses, pill presses. You might be looking for transactions related to just generally have more, controls, higher scrutiny around chemical companies, laboratory equipment, medical supply companies, because this is a lot of the companies that are often utilized for this trade. Now, on the other side, you also have the street level sales, right? And in this case, it looks a lot like your traditional drug trafficking. So if you are a smaller institution, if you're an MSB, if you are a community bank, credit union, etc., you are not off the hook for looking for things like procurement financing, because they might still utilize you. But you may face more risk from the day-to-day street level sales being laundered through your institution. And that's where like customers using P2P apps. So there was a really good FinCEN financial trend analysis of like SAR filings in this space, and it found that when we're looking at the actual like drug sales, it was a lot of still fentanyl traffickers selling in the United States prefer cash, and they prefer peer-to-peer transfers. And actually, it was like pretty 50-50 in the reports when those came up. So peer-to-peer, think like Cash App, Venmo, etc. Cash, obviously cash, right? So some of those classic red flags of drug trafficking, that I'm sure you can apply to your fentanyl related risk if you're in a place of, of a use in the trafficking process. So probably went too far down the rabbit hole on red flags, but just wanted to piggyback on what Cheyenne said to elaborate on, know your place in the kind of fentanyl trafficking economy, right? And understand that it really is an economy that has procurement, distribution, street level sales. All of those require laundering and movement of value.
So a lot of access points to be able to tap into or identify suspicious activities, to potentially flag transactions or customers, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. And, just one more thing, really leverage some of your sanctions and export controls if you have any of that at your institution. If you've done work related to export controls for, like Russian related activity, right? A lot of institutions built out more of sanctions capacity, more export control capacity. Obviously, there's a ton of sanctions being placed on fentanyl trafficking organizations. That's not actually new. We've done that for a while from the U.S., other countries as well. U.S. under things like Kingpin Act, et cetera. But it's being expanded even further. So leverage your sanction screening, leverage your export controls if you have an export control function within your institution, because this is really very similar to it, right? You're looking for goods, you're looking for trade, you're looking for commodities. And so, so those are really going to be helpful, levers you can pull to help to identify some of these suspicious transactions.
Nice. Had a comment that I wanted you guys to weigh in on. I think this relates a little bit to one of our headlines, but Gerard asked, what are your thoughts on the FinCEN order this week in Mexico? And it looks like, I think that's the same thing that we were talking about in terms of the sanctions on some of the banks that we mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the same story that we touched on earlier. And thanks for bringing it back up. Just to quickly reiterate, I would say that I think it is as mentioned, it is an effort by the U.S. administration to get Mexico to pay attention to enforcement at the institutions. How much the institutions directly impacted by this, are like kind of central to the fentanyl trade. I don't know. FinCEN usually doesn't act unless they have some good info. So I'm assuming there was something here that they chose these institutions for a reason. But I would guess also that part of the reasons was, they are small-ish institutions, most of them, and it's a lever to pull to try to get Mexico to kind of crack down harder on what are probably some of the big players still out there.
I agree.
All right, so we'll jump into a little bit more of a discussion kind of around detection and disruption of these types of things. So, what are some of the red flags that FinCrime professionals should be, on the lookout for, or are there specific customer behaviors, industries, or transaction volumes that should raise suspicion?
Sean, you wanna take a crack at that one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And forgive me, I have a list here because I did not memorize all of them. You know, FinCrime professionals, we're experts at making sure we have the right references, right? There's no way to keep it all in our brains. So, Brian touched on a lot of these red flags that we're looking at, customer behaviors and that sort of thing. Chemical, pharmaceuticals. I've heard labs, those sorts of businesses definitely need additional review. They should be pretty high risk in your institution if they aren't already. Residential address uses for business. Does that make sense? And in conjunction with other red flags. Transactions related to pill presses, again, and other instruments that might be used in the creation. So that includes industrial pressure vessels or laboratory glassware, especially at a residential address. Like that's not great. That's not what we want you doing at home. Don't do that at home. Individuals with no apparent connection to the chemical industry making these purchases. So again, it's a know your customer thing. On smaller scale, when we're looking at street level purchases, that sort of thing, especially for the P2P payments. I know that emojis have become big in that sphere. There's like a whole list of emojis, specific emojis that relate to certain drugs, and then there's nicknames and jargon that are associated also with fentanyl, so they can call it out without necessarily calling it out. So if you are in a P2P service and you are able to alert on those sorts of things, it might not be a bad thing to add to your practice. For institutions, we've got wire transfers, virtual currency payments, so cryptocurrency payments to high-risk jurisdictions, known high-risk jurisdictions for precursor chemicals or production. Transaction routes through intermediary jurisdictions, so think Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea. Structured deposits, high velocity transactions, rapid movement of funds. So these are very classic red flags, right? So definitely keep on the lookout for those. Many sending to one in a high risk jurisdiction, unusual cryptocurrency payments, and then, freight forwarders and shipping companies in conjunction with chemical purchases. That should absolutely be a red flag. So there's a lot to look out for. But a lot of it is, does it make sense? Does it make sense for this customer in this industry to do these things? So plenty of room to intervene.
Yeah, and I see some comments in the chat about like the varieties of fentanyl out there. We're using the term fentanyl here, but the person's totally right that there is an entire class of synthetic opioids that have a wide variety of different names. And, so, yeah, here we go, Fenbin, that type of thing. There's also other ones that don't, sound anything like fentanyl, xylazine, sometimes referred to as tranq here in the US. There's lots of synthetic opioids. So, really what we're talking about here with fentanyl's the most common one, I think, still the most prevalent one out there, but there is a universe of synthetic opioids, which many of them also very highly addictive and dangerous, that are also part of your challenge here in monitoring. So don't just be looking for fentanyl. And to Cheyenne's point, when you're looking for these search terms and things like payment memos, or to the extent that you might be at a peer-to-peer firm and you're looking at them in emojis, et cetera, that are included with all these payment messages, go bigger than just ones related to fentanyl. Look for others as well. DEA has a good list of them, and we actually have a training. I wish we had it ready now. It is very close. We actually have a training on this topic that provides some useful resources and links. It's a online training course related to fentanyl trafficking, built with a lot of the input from FinTrack, FinCEN, et cetera, using their great guidance that they've been putting out there, as well as other sources. So be on the lookout for that, especially if you're an ACFCS member, and that'll absolutely be a good resource for you. But yes, thanks for that comment on, hey, look more broadly than just fentanyl, because it's definitely true.
Man, our time always goes so fast during these conversations. So want to get down to kind of, how we can wrap it up, and what would you two, and I want to hear from both of you, leave other FinCrime, and compliance professionals with, in terms of thinking about fentanyl trafficking and identifying and helping disrupt those in their careers, in their institutions today. Cheyenne, you want to go first?
Yeah. So, I always take a more personal route with this, but it's really, like, all in all, a very social issue. It's a really interesting thing if you look up the history of opium. So, opiates stem from opium originally, and then we have the synthetic category, but we're talking thousands upon thousands of years of history. If you don't think your country has been impacted, you're probably wrong. Like, just across the world, it's something that has existed for so long, and it's a really curious thing. But it's immensely social. The way that it's abused, the way people are manipulated, the way that it's snuck into things. And if you haven't been immediately impacted, I guarantee you know somebody who has. So um, there's a lot to be said with looking out for your institution. There's a lot to be said for also sharing the word. If you know a fun fact with somebody that might help eventually save their life, share it. You never know, right? It's the little things that add up into bigger things. So keep on keeping on in your institution. Make sure your alerts are up to date. Make sure you keep watch, be diligent of who you're doing business with and who they're related to, and just look out for your community, for your neighbors, for your friends, for the people around you. Um, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I think, I'll just kind of rehash a little bit of what I said earlier on understand your kind of risks based on the fentanyl trafficking ecosystem and economy of fentanyl, right? Because a lot of institutions face risks out there that might not be directly related to like laundering money from the Sinaloa cartel, So it's bigger than that. You need to, particularly understand your procurement risks, what types of trade transactions are going through your institution. Your geographic risks are important. Am I, subject to potential laundering? Am I near the southwest border? That type of thing. Or again, is it more about procurement of medical equipment, so on and so forth? So really dig into understanding this fentanyl trafficking ecosystem and apply your monitoring, your alerts, et cetera, based on where your risks lie. It's straightforward, but it really matters here. because it's not something that necessarily you can apply one generic set of rules, red flags, monitoring criteria until you figure that piece of it out. And then the other thing is, just be aware that this is constantly evolving. If you are, kind of when this is the opioid epidemic in the United States has been going on for like over 20 years at this point, right? And it's changed from prescription drugs to counterfeit pills to heroin to fentanyl to now other synthetic opioids. It's likely to continue to evolve, right? So when you're thinking about onboarding, customer onboarding, know your customer, when you're thinking about transaction monitoring, really make sure that you're staying current. Even geographic risk changes. The primary precursor chemical suppliers were really all about China. It was Hubei province, it was Hebei province. It was actually a lot of it was concentrated in Wuhan, the city where it was the epicenter of the COVID pandemic. And then during COVID, that really changed, right? More precursor suppliers popped up. There are reports related to precursors from Estonia, precursors from India has been a bigger supplier more recently. Poland, Dominican Republic has come up in some reports. Latvia shut down a big lab that was producing synthetic opioids, including precursors recently. So it's gotten more global, and your geographic risk and your risk assessment has to adapt to that. So take that risk-based approach, understand your institution or your organization's role in how it might be used for procurement, distribution, or laundering, or all three of those, and kind of reassess your geographic risks as these things change would be my 3 takeaways.
All right. Guys, thank you. This has been a great conversation today. I think super relevant and really just critically important, and something that everybody, I think, in this conversation, everybody who's watching today, whether they like it or not, is probably eventually going to, as Cheyenne said, encounter this either personally or professionally. So stay vigilant out there. Your work in this area, even if it doesn't seem like it, could save a life sometime. As always, if you are not an ACFCS member, head on over to acfcs.org today and become a member. We have very, very soon, just little more than a month out, FinCrime Virtual Week coming up. That's going to be August 11th through the 15th. You absolutely do not want to miss this event. We have an incredible lineup, amazing speakers, some of the leading thinkers, investigators, founders, innovators in the FinCrime and compliance space, sharing their knowledge with you. You can find that on acfcs.org under our events tab. Also, make sure that you join us next month on July 25th for our next FinCrime Friday Chat. We are going to be talking about generative AI and how that interacts with financial crime. Also going to be a great conversation. We look forward to you tuning in with us and sharing your questions and thoughts and comments on that topic as well. Again, acfcs.org. You can find hundreds of hours of training, incredible resources, tips, tools, tricks to help you elevate your career and take your FinCrime and compliance work, job, experience, whatever, to that next level. Thank you for tuning in. Stay vigilant.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Clayton.